I remember exactly what the room smelled like that evening. Lemon polish on old wood, something sweet baking in the kitchen, and the unmistakable scent of my mother's perfume, the one she only wore on important occasions. The dining room was full, louder than usual, with relatives I hadn't seen in years leaning in close to one another, glasses clinking, laughter echoing off the walls. My father was sitting at the head of the long oak table, beaming in the way men do when they finally get to take off the uniform and rest. 40 years with the Louisiana Department of Transportation, and he had made it to retirement. People kept giving speeches, patting him on the back, joking about his freedom now. I had flown in 2 days earlier from Houston. Took the Greyhound, actually. I didn't tell anyone that, of course. I didn't need the eye rolls. I showed up in a pale green dress I'd picked up at a resale shop, did my hair, even got my nails done. It felt important to look nice. He was my dad after all, and despite everything I wanted to be there. I was seated near the middle of the table, 2 seats away from my younger sister, Rachel. She had her hair up in one of those tight blonde buns she liked, makeup immaculate, nails French-tipped. She kept glancing at me from time to time with that half-smirk she'd been perfecting since we were kids. She always looked like she had a secret, like she knew something no one else did. And tonight, apparently, she had decided it was the perfect time to let it out. It was somewhere between the gumbo being cleared and the cake being brought out that it happened. People were sharing memories, little stories about dad fixing cars in the driveway, or yelling at the Saints game on TV. Someone asked Rachel how her job was going. She was working at a real estate firm in Baton Rouge. And then, like she couldn't help herself, she turned to me and said it. You know, it's kinda wild that Alice made it, she said, voice just loud enough to carry across the table. What's it been? 10 years since you dropped out of Delgado? No degree, no job we know of. I mean, I always wondered how you paid your rent. Or do you still live in that sketchy place off Airline Highway? What do you even do these days? Sell weed behind gas stations or something? There was a second, a beat, where I thought she had to be joking. But no one laughed. My cousin Jenna's fork paused midair. Uncle Ray shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I looked straight at Rachel. She didn't flinch. She was serious. And then she smiled, that same tight-lipped smile that had followed me through every childhood competition and awkward teenage dinner. Like she was waiting for me to explode. But I didn't. I barely opened my mouth when my father slammed his hand down on the table. The silverware jumped. The room went dead quiet. That's enough, he barked. But he wasn't talking to Rachel. His eyes were locked on me. I've had it with this. You show up here acting like you're one of us when you haven't lifted a damn finger to help this family in years. We're all supposed to pretend you didn't just abandon your future? You think we don't notice? I couldn't breathe. I blinked. Once. Twice. He stood up, shaking now, his face red, that vein in his neck bulging like it used to when he'd get mad at the TV. Get out, he said. Just get the hell out of here. No. You're not welcome in this house anymore. I looked at my mom. She didn't speak. She just nodded once, slowly, eyes on her plate. Like this had all been decided before I ever walked in. I didn't cry. I wanted to. My throat was closing up, but I refused to let the tears fall in front of them. Instead, I reached down for my bag. It was a plain canvas tote with a broken zipper and a frayed handle. I had brought a small gift for Dad in it. A framed picture from when he taught me how to ride a bike, me grinning with a missing tooth, him holding the seat behind me. I left it on the floor. I didn't say a word. I just walked toward the hallway, past the buffet table, past the family photos on the wall. My heels echoed as I crossed the wood floor. No one followed. No one called out. As I stepped out onto the porch, the warm Louisiana night hit me like a wave. The cicadas were screaming in the trees. Cars lined the street, their windshields catching the last light from the porch lamp. I didn't know where I was going, not really. I didn't even have a hotel booked. I just started walking. What no one at that table knew, what Rachel would never have guessed, what my father hadn't bothered to ask, was that for the past 5 years, I had been paying off their mortgage. Quietly. Through the credit union where I work under a different name, since I never changed mine legally after the falling out with my parents years ago. I had been wiring money to my mom's account monthly. She never thanked me, but she never stopped cashing the transfers either. When Dad got laid off early last year and couldn't cover the bills, I took care of it. Their utilities, their car insurance, even Rachel's student loans that mysteriously disappeared after she flunked her first semester. They all thought I was some kind of dropout loser. Maybe because I never corrected them. Maybe because I had learned that the more you give, the less they respect you, at least in my family. That night, as I sat at the bus station waiting for the midnight ride back to Houston, I kept hearing Rachel's voice in my head, sharp and smug. I kept seeing the way my father looked at me like I was dirt on his shoe. But I also thought about the envelope I'd stopped mailing 3 weeks ago, the one with their mortgage payment. Let them figure it out. Let them wonder. They wanted me out. They got what they wanted. I guess I always knew I was invisible in my own family, or at least not the kind of daughter they wanted. That realization didn't hit all at once. It came in slow drips like a leaky faucet building up over the years until everything inside me was soaked with it. By the time I was 14, I had already built my first website from scratch. It wasn't much to look at, just a basic homepage for a family friend's lawn care business. But it worked. The owner, a guy named Mr. Peters who lived 2 blocks over, handed me $60 in cash and told me it was better than anything his nephew had done. That moment stuck with me not just because it was my first paid gig, but because it was the first time someone looked at something I made and said it was good. Not good for a kid, not cute, but actually good. At 16, I was repairing broken layouts, building custom scripts, and making Shopify templates before most kids in my class could format a Word document. My weekends were spent in libraries and community forums, not because anyone told me to, but because I loved it. I'd wake up excited to debug code to get a client's checkout page working properly, or to figure out how to make a mobile site load faster on garbage Wi-Fi. I still remember the thrill of seeing my first $300 hit my PayPal account after I built a full e-commerce site for a boutique in downtown Lafayette. I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would be proud. But when I told my dad about it, he barely looked up from the TV. $300. That's what? A week's groceries? Call me when you get a real job. He used to work on bridges and overpasses across the state, spending weeks away from home pouring concrete and fixing steel. To him, unless you were wearing a hard hat or holding a college degree, you weren't working. He'd spent years climbing the ladder, dealing with bureaucrats and bids and inspectors, so in his mind, anything that wasn't tangible, anything digital, wasn't real. And my mom? She just smiled tightly and said, "That's a nice little hobby, sweetheart. But don't let it distract you from your schoolwork. Rachel's working so hard to stay top of her class. You should be doing the same." Rachel, of course, was the golden child. Always had been. She brought home A's like it was nothing, captained the debate team, got the lead in school plays. Every time she walked into a room, it was like someone turned up the lights. My parents fawned over her college acceptances like she was royalty. Tulane. Even a shot at Emory, though she didn't get in. Meanwhile, I had a drawer full of certificates from coding boot camps, emails from satisfied clients, and a local bakery that swore my redesign doubled their online orders. None of that mattered. Rachel was going places and I was wasting my potential on the internet. Even at school, teachers were more interested in her than me. One time in junior year, I overheard Ms. Garrett, our guidance counselor, say to another teacher, "Rachel Morgan's got a real future ahead of her. Her sister, well, she's sweet but a little aimless." Aimless. I was coding in Python by then. I was running a one-woman business after school and taking freelance work from people I'd never met in person. But to them, I was just a quiet girl who needed direction. There were nights I stayed up until 3 or 4 in the morning working on back-end logic for a small clothing retailer in Shreveport, only to get up at 7 for school and pretend I hadn't just pulled a full shift. My eyes would burn during first period. I'd bring energy drinks in my backpack and chug them in the hallway between classes. No one noticed. No one cared. When Rachel got accepted into LSU, the whole family threw a party. Balloons, banners, champagne. There was a cake with her name on it in purple and gold frosting. People came from out of town to celebrate. Aunts and uncles I hadn't seen in years showed up with cards and hugs. My mom cried when she opened the acceptance letter. My dad called her our future senator. I remember standing in the corner of the living room during that party, holding a paper plate with a piece of cake, nodding along to everyone's compliments. I didn't say much. That same week, I had just closed my biggest contract to date, $1,200 for a full-stack job that took me 3 weeks. I never told anyone. I knew they wouldn't understand. I was already used to keeping things to myself by then. It got to the point where I started using aliases online. Alice became A. Morgan Dev, or sometimes just Lex, when I didn't want clients knowing I was young or female, or based out of a town most people had never heard of. I built up a small portfolio, learned to write invoices, negotiated deadlines. I learned how to fake confidence in emails. I built things that worked, things that made people money. And I did it all in silence, in the background of a house that celebrated everything I wasn't. It wasn't just about recognition. It was about feeling like I existed. Like what I did had value. But every time I tried to share, I'd get brushed off. "That's nice, hon," my mom would say while making dinner or folding Rachel's laundry. "But have you thought about going back to community college? You could take something practical. Maybe business courses." I stopped trying eventually. Let them think I was drifting. Let Rachel gloat about her GPA while I made more in a month than she did in her part-time tutoring job. I learned to play the role they assigned me. Quiet, inconsistent, a little bit of a mess. That way they left me alone. And in that space I built a world of my own. One where I could grow, earn, and succeed without anyone's approval. They never saw it coming. Not the money I'd saved. Not the business I'd quietly registered under a pseudonym. Not the clients I picked up from across the country. And especially not the day I took over the mortgage after Dad's health scare left him unable to work full-time. I told the bank I was their niece. Created a clean digital trail. They never asked questions as long as the checks cleared. To my family I was a failure. But in the shadows of their indifference, I had become something they could never see. Something they'd never understand. I had become free. When I moved to Houston, it wasn't some grand, symbolic fresh start. It was desperation. The apartment I found was just barely habitable, a one-bedroom unit in a crumbling beige complex off Beechnut Street that smelled constantly of damp drywall and cigarette smoke from the guy upstairs. My neighbor to the left kept a parrot that screamed at random intervals, and the walls were so thin I could hear the plumbing when the woman on the other side flushed her toilet. But the rent was $435 a month, all bills paid, and that was what mattered. I brought everything I owned in 2 suitcases and a second-hand laptop I had rebuilt myself using replacement parts from eBay. I didn't have furniture. My first week there, I slept on a pile of folded clothes and a thin blanket, waking up with my back sore and my arms numb. Eventually, I found a futon frame someone left near the dumpster and dragged it up the stairs. I cleaned it with vinegar and baking soda, covered it with 2 beach towels and called it my bed. I was living on about $500 a month then. Sometimes less. I'd buy 24 packs of instant ramen and rotate in cans of beans or frozen vegetables when I could afford them. I didn't have a microwave, so I heated everything on a single electric hot plate I bought from a thrift store for $10. Most nights, dinner was noodles with half a bouillon cube and a sliced boiled egg. But I wasn't lazy. I was working hard. I'd take small freelance coding gigs, fixing CSS for bloggers, debugging store plugins for Etsy sellers, cleaning up broken WordPress installs for people who didn't know the first thing about backend security. Sometimes the pay was $10, sometimes $50. I kept detailed spreadsheets of every job, every invoice, and every deadline. It wasn't sustainable, not really, but it kept me afloat while I worked on something bigger. My first real idea was born out of frustration. I hated the way most freelance platforms worked. The fees were high, the client-side experience was clunky, and the review systems were easily manipulated. I wanted to build something cleaner, something that gave both freelancers and clients a better deal. I called it SwiftStack. I spent 4 months building it, designing the interface, writing documentation, testing different payment APIs. I sunk everything I had into the hosting, legal setup, domain registration, and UI kits. All in, it cost me a little over $4,000. That money had taken me nearly 2 years to save. The day I launched it, I remember sitting cross-legged on the floor of my apartment, laptop on an overturned box, refreshing the site over and over. I had posted about it in a few niche subreddits, messaged old clients, reached out to a couple small YouTubers I knew who covered indie tech. But the traffic trickled in like molasses. People visited the landing page, clicked around, and left. No signups. No job posts. No users. Just silence. At first, I told myself it was timing. Maybe I had launched during a slow week. Maybe I needed to market it harder. I spent another 3 weeks writing blog posts, cold emailing small business owners, redesigning the front page to make it more conversion-friendly. But it was no use. People didn't trust a new platform with no one on it. Without users, I couldn't attract more users. It was a catch-22 and I had no resources left to break the loop. I cried in the shower the night I officially gave up. Not because of the money, I had lost a lot but I could rebuild. But because I had believed in it so fiercely. I had seen it working in my head. I had imagined people using it, growing with it, thanking me for it. And none of that came true. I let myself sulk for maybe a week before I started working on the next thing. I still had my laptop, my brain, and my time. That had to be enough. The second idea came from my own financial chaos. I was juggling multiple income streams, gigs, odd jobs, some affiliate income, and trying to budget on spreadsheets that never quite fit my needs. So I thought, what if I built a budgeting app for people like me? One that didn't assume a regular paycheck or stable income. I sketched it out on legal pads I got from Dollar Tree. I spent 2 months prototyping it, built it using React Native and called it Flex Funds. I learned my lesson from the first launch and kept things simple. I pushed it to the Google Play Store, tweeted about it, and posted it in a few gig economy forums. This time I got downloads. A few dozen, then a few hundred. But then the messages started coming in. It crashed on older Android versions. Some people couldn't log in. Others said the budget categories didn't update properly. My user analytics were messy and hard to interpret. Reviews hovered around 2.7 stars. I tried to patch things, stayed up late fixing bugs, but I hadn't built it to scale. The architecture was weak. Every fix introduced new problems. Eventually, downloads stopped growing. I didn't take it down, but I stopped promoting it. It had failed in a slower, more painful way. By then I was tired. I was down to maybe $100 in savings and the gigs were drying up. The recession had started to hit freelancers hard. My power got cut off for 3 days in July because I missed a bill. I worked at the public library using their Wi-Fi, hiding the fact that I was charging my laptop at the outlets by the kids section. I remember the embarrassment of waiting in line at the grocery store and having to put things back when I miscalculated tax. So I couldn't stop building. It was the only thing that made sense to me. I took a break from the big ideas and focused on small, fast tools, little calculators, Chrome extensions, things I could finish in under a week. And then, in a half-desperate, half-inspired moment, I started sketching out an inventory tracking tool for a small e-commerce seller I'd met through a previous job. She complained that her existing system was a mess of spreadsheets and paper logs. So I mocked up something better. I called it BinScope. It was ugly at first. Clunky. Buggy as hell. It barely worked, and the first version corrupted item logs when someone tried to edit them too fast. But she used it anyway. She kept sending me feedback. I kept fixing things. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time I felt like maybe I wasn't drowning. Maybe I was learning how to swim. I was 25 the year I launched Greenlinks. I had just moved into a slightly better apartment. Still modest, still in Houston, but with a balcony that faced a row of scraggly pine trees and a working AC unit that didn't sound like a dying engine. My kitchen was still too small for a full-size fridge, but I had a decent chair, a real desk, and for the first time in years, a mattress that didn't sit directly on the floor. It was enough. Greenlinks wasn't born from some grand strategy or market analysis. It came from a comment on a Reddit thread about eco-friendly laundry detergent. Someone asked why there wasn't a simple way to find sustainable companies beyond the same 5 brands that dominated every article and list. I started sketching ideas that night, staying up until nearly 4 in the morning. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not just as a tool but as a concept, a centralized platform that helped users discover verified eco-conscious businesses in different sectors. Fashion, food, cleaning products, transportation, housing, tech. The deeper I dug, the more I saw the gap. Most so-called green directories were either too niche, too bloated with ads, or too shallow to be useful. I wanted to build something clean, functional, and honest. Something that didn't just scrape product listings but verified companies based on real sustainability metrics. Supply chain transparency, materials sourcing, emissions reporting, labor practices. It took me 6 months of planning and writing the core logic before I even started thinking about a front end. I launched the beta version of Greenlinks with about a dozen verified companies and a search algorithm that was, frankly, a mess. I posted the link in a sustainability Facebook group, a couple of forums, and my nearly dead Twitter account. The first week I got 20 downloads. I almost didn't notice it. 20 felt like a joke. But by the second week I had over 200. A vegan influencer reposted my link. Then a journalist from an indie tech blog asked to interview me. I spent 20 minutes on the phone pretending I had a team, when it was just me and a spreadsheet with way too many tabs. By the end of that first month, Greenlinks had over 3,000 users. A handful of eco-brands reached out asking how they could get listed. I introduced an affiliate model and opened paid verification tiers with stricter criteria. Revenue hit $12,000 in the first 30 days. I refreshed the dashboard so many times that I started to feel physically nauseous, convinced there had to be a bug in the Stripe integration. But the numbers were real. I paid off the last of my credit card debt and bought myself a second monitor. Growth didn't happen overnight after that, but it didn't slow down either. I hired 2 freelancers. One for front-end redesign, one for content management. Then I brought on a data analyst to help me build a more dynamic scoring system for vendors. Investors started emailing me. At first I ignored them. I had never sat in a boardroom, never worn a blazer, and I assumed most of them would see right through me. But after a particularly aggressive spike in server costs and a 6-hour outage that left me curled up on the floor wondering what I was doing with my life, I accepted a meeting. Then another. Within 6 months I closed my first seed round. By the time I turned 28, Greenlinks had 50 full-time employees, a sleek downtown office with moss walls and open ceilings, and a user base in the millions. We had partnerships with NGOs, governments, and universities. We launched a B2B version of the platform. My calendar filled up with media interviews, investor calls, and strategy meetings. I had a CTO, a head of marketing, and a personal assistant who scheduled my days down to the hour. My personal income crossed $1.2 million that year, not including equity. I had finally made it by almost any standard. I had a successful company, a meaningful product, and financial independence I never thought possible when I was boiling ramen on a hot plate in a moldy apartment. But the strangest part was how little any of that changed the way my family saw me. They knew on paper that I did something with tech. But they didn't care enough to ask what that actually meant. Whenever I called home, or worse when they called me, usually out of obligation or when someone needed help with their laptop, they still talked to me like I was a kid playing around on the internet. My mom would say things like, "Are you still doing those little projects of yours?" Or, "It's great that you keep busy with your apps and things." Rachel once joked during a phone call, "Do you even have a real job yet? Or are you still working in your pajamas?" She laughed at her own joke, not realizing that I was in fact on a business trip in Berlin, staying in a hotel suite with a marble bathroom and a rooftop bar. I didn't correct her. I never did. It wasn't worth the effort. No matter how far I'd come, they had already decided who I was years ago. Even when Green Links got a short write-up in Forbes and a local TV segment ran a story on young founders changing the way we shop sustainably, my father didn't mention it. Not once. I had forwarded the link to his email assuming he wouldn't click it. And I was right. I kept paying the mortgage on their house under the same pseudonym I had always used. My mother probably knew it was me deep down, but she never asked. And I never offered. I sometimes wondered what they would say if they knew who had been keeping their lights on all these years. But I also knew they'd probably find a way to diminish it. "You didn't have to do that," they'd say. Or worse, "We would have been fine without you." So I stopped waiting for their recognition. I stopped needing their permission to be proud of myself. Every now and then, when I'm sitting in a meeting with people in suits who call me Ms. Morgan, and hang on my every word, I remember that I'm still the same girl who rebuilt her laptop on a folding table and launched her first product in a cramped, roach-infested apartment. I remember living on $5 meal plans and using free Wi-Fi to survive. I remember being told over and over that I wasn't doing anything real. And now, I run a company they've never heard of, serving people they'll never meet, solving problems they've never thought about. And that's enough for me. In early 2019, I got a call from Rachel. I hadn't heard her voice in nearly 4 months. She didn't even say hello. Just launched into it with that clipped, frantic tone she used when she didn't have the emotional range for empathy. "Mom. She found a lump. They're doing more tests. It might be cancer." I stood there in my office, frozen, while the team outside my door kept working like nothing had changed. I remember the light from my monitor flickering across the brushed steel of my nameplate. 3 letters that suddenly felt useless. When the biopsy confirmed it, stage 2 breast cancer. My mother didn't tell me directly. Rachel sent a group text, a cold, impersonal line. "Confirmed. With cancer. She starts chemo next week. No need to come. We're fine." I didn't reply. I sat in the dark for a long time that night, not because I didn't care, but because I knew exactly what was about to happen. The treatments. The bills. The stress. The way they'd all pretend it was manageable until it wasn't. And it wasn't. Within 2 months, the total cost of my mother's care had reached over $85,000. Insurance only covered a portion. The rest was a jumble of co-pays, out-of-network specialists, medication, post-op care. My father took out a loan. Rachel set up a Facebook fundraiser that collected maybe $600 before stalling. They canceled their cable plan and downgraded the car insurance. My dad stopped answering phone calls from numbers he didn't recognize. I could have wired the money directly, but I knew how that would go. Pride, excuses, deflection. They would have refused to take it from me. Or worse, they would have taken it while pretending I owed it to them. So I found another way. Through a nonprofit I had quietly partnered with the year before, I arranged to have the remaining medical bills paid in full. I provided the documents, signed the forms, made the donations anonymously through a donor-advised fund under a shell name. The hospital accepted the payment. My mother got a letter of confirmation marked cleared. She called Rachel and said, "I don't know what happened, but the foundation must have covered it. Must have been one of those cases where they just help." Rachel called me a few days later. She was breathless, giddy. "You'll never believe it. Some charity stepped in and took care of Mom's bills. Completely. Can you believe the luck?" I kept my voice flat. "That's amazing." And she agreed. "It's a miracle." Later that year, Rachel got engaged. Of course, she wanted a big wedding. Garden venue, live jazz, custom floral arrangements, 25 tables at $300 each. She and her fiancé were already drowning in student loans, credit card debt, and were both in jobs that paid enough for groceries and rent, but not much more. My parents offered to chip in, but their contribution barely covered the photographer. Rachel called crying one evening. She said she didn't want to postpone, that it wasn't fair, that this was supposed to be her moment. And I listened quietly, nodding into the silence. She never asked me directly. She didn't have to. I funneled $55,000 through a discreet gift certificate program connected to one of our vendors. The payment hit the venue, the caterer, the dress boutique, all in perfect order. Rachel called my mom a few days later in a state of disbelief. "Everything got covered," she said. Someone anonymously took care of the deposits. Can you believe it? And my mom, always ready with an answer that avoided the truth, said, sometimes things just work out for good people. A few months after that, a hurricane tore through their neighborhood in Louisiana. The house I'd spent half my childhood in had 4 inches of water inside. The roof buckled. The fence collapsed. Windows shattered. FEMA sent an inspector who scribbled on a clipboard and left without making eye contact. The reimbursement covered maybe 10%. My father talked about selling. Rachel suggested a GoFundMe again. I didn't say anything. I just paid the contractor directly. Roof repairs, water damage remediation, new drywall, new siding. I used a construction firm my company had worked with before. They did the job well. Came out to just over $40,000. I asked the manager to leave the invoice blank. When Rachel asked my dad how he managed to get everything fixed so fast, he shrugged and said, insurance finally came through, I guess. Must have missed something on the paperwork. Altogether, I had spent nearly $180,000 on them without them ever knowing. That number didn't even include the constant monthly payments I made behind the scenes, their phone plans which I paid through a corporate line, the Netflix, Hulu and Disney Plus subscriptions, billed to an old card they thought was part of a family plan, the car insurance premium that showed up every month like clockwork, covered by a recurring payment they never traced. They believed in luck. They believed in anonymous kindness. They believed in the world being slightly more generous than it really is. What they didn't believe, what they never considered, was that I could be the one behind any of it. Sometimes when I'd call and hear my mother laugh and say things like, we've been really lucky this year, Alice, I'd smile into the receiver knowing full well that luck had nothing to do with it. I had held them up for years, kept them from drowning, all while they continued to believe I was just the quiet one who dabbled in computers. They never thanked me. They never knew they should. And maybe that was the hardest part. Not the money, not the invisibility, but the fact that I had loved them enough to give, and they had loved me so little they couldn't even imagine I was capable of it. I spent 3 weeks writing the speech. I rewrote it 17 times. Practiced it in the mirror at night until I could say every word without my voice shaking. It wasn't a eulogy, but it felt like one. It was for my father's second retirement party. He'd gone back to work part-time after the first, and now, at 71, he was stepping down again. Rachel was organizing the whole thing at a country club outside of Lafayette. I wasn't invited directly. My mother mentioned it offhandedly during a rushed phone call about something else. I waited for a formal invite. It never came. I RSVP'd anyway. I flew in from Austin on a Friday afternoon. I wore a navy blue blazer, a white blouse and black slacks. Simple, professional, forgettable. My assistant had booked a hotel room under my middle name, and I'd had a bouquet of orchids sent to the venue in advance. The envelope on the flowers just said, for all the years. My speech wasn't dramatic. I had practiced restraint. I wanted to tell them what I had done for them, yes, but not with bitterness. I told myself I didn't want praise. I wanted recognition. I wanted to be seen. The banquet room was full. A few dozen family members, old coworkers, family friends. Rachel was there, of course, wearing some pale designer thing and holding court by the bar, laughing a little too loudly. My father wore a crisp white button-down and his old union pin. He looked proud. Comfortable. Everyone else looked at me like they weren't sure if I was supposed to be there. When they handed me the mic, it was with a little hesitation. Rachel looked confused. My father just gave a stiff nod and sat back in his chair. I started by congratulating him. I thanked him for his years of work, for the roof he'd kept over our heads, for the lessons in endurance. Then I shifted. I know some of you think I disappeared, I said. That I never amounted to much. That I've been living in the shadows of this family's expectations. People started to murmur. Rachel folded her arms. But the truth is, for the past 10 years I've been here. Quietly. Invisibly. Paying bills that weren't mine. Covering emergencies, funding dreams, and holding this family together from behind the curtain. I pulled the envelope from my bag. It was thick, sealed with a small gold clip, and inside were copies of every financial document I had. Proof of the hospital payments, the wedding, the hurricane repairs, the utilities, the phone bills, the mortgage. Everything. I laid the folder gently on the table in front of my father. Then I placed a smaller envelope on top. Inside it was a certified check for $100,000, payable to my parents' joint account. I'm not asking for applause, I said. I'm not asking for forgiveness or attention. I just want the truth to be seen. For once. My father stared at the folder. He didn't open it. Rachel leaned forward and snatched the check, squinting at the amount before snorting. Oh my God, she said, laughing. Is this a joke? Did you really print fake bank statements and think we'd believe you? What is this, laundered drug money? Jesus, Alice, are you still out there selling pills behind a gas station? A few people laughed, awkwardly. Some just looked away. My chest tightened. I looked at my father, hoping, begging silently for him to say something. Anything. He picked up the folder, looked at it like it was covered in filth, and without a word tore it in half. Then again, until the table was littered with paper scraps and that sterile banking font I'd stared at for hours, now in pieces. He stood up slowly, looked at me, and said in the same voice he used when I was a kid and forgot to lock the back door, "Get out. You don't come here and lie in front of my friends. Get out of my house." It wasn't even his house. I had paid for half the damn thing. I turned to my mother. She sat still, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on her wine glass. She didn't look at me. She didn't blink. She just sat there like someone had unplugged her. I stood there for a second longer, long enough to burn every detail into my memory. The red cloth napkins. The smell of overcooked salmon. The way the chandelier lights reflected in Rachel's glass of white wine. Then I picked up my bag and walked out. No one followed me. Outside, the air was heavy with that wet Louisiana heat that clings to your skin like a second layer. I walked across the gravel lot in silence. I didn't cry. Not right away. But in the Uber back to the hotel, I let the tears fall. Quiet, controlled, not because I was humiliated, but because I had finally said the truth out loud and it had meant nothing. I had built something from nothing. I had saved them again and again and again. And still they saw me as a joke. A liability. A stranger. But I also felt something shift. A thread snapping. A weight lifting. They had chosen their version of me. And I was done trying to edit it. The idea came to me the night I got back to Austin after the retirement dinner. I was sitting alone on my balcony, watching the headlights move up and down the freeway in the distance, my body still vibrating with the aftershocks of what had happened. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every word from that night echoed in my skull on a loop. Rachel's smirk, my father's voice tearing through me like it had when I was a kid, and my mother's silence, cold and complete. I opened my laptop around 3 a.m. and started typing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting revenge. Not exactly. It was more like a controlled burn, the kind you start on purpose when the ground is too dry and the threat of wildfire hangs in the air. Something had to go. Something had to change. The house had never been in their name. That was the detail most people missed. For 15 years they'd been renting it from a distant cousin of my father's, a man named Hank who moved to Florida and couldn't be bothered to maintain it. I knew this because I'd been paying Hank directly under a private arrangement, pretending to be a distant benefactor covering Alice Morgan's overdue rent. Hank never asked questions. He got his check each month and was happy. I had already set up Green Links Property LLC a year before, mainly to manage real estate investments I'd started acquiring as part of a long-term strategy for the company. It was a shell company in the legal sense but fully legitimate. One holding property in a few states, each asset documented, taxes paid. I contacted Hank's lawyer the next day. Within 4 days I had an offer in writing. By the end of the week it was mine. Paid in full, no loan, no lien, clean title. I didn't call. I didn't write. I instructed my lawyer to prepare an official tenant notification letter, drafted with the cold, efficient language of legalese. It was sent via certified mail and posted on the front door in accordance with Louisiana tenant law. The letter informed the residents of 314 Browning Street that effective immediately, the property was under new ownership, Green Links Property LLC. The rent would be adjusted to reflect current market value, which in that neighborhood meant nearly double what they had been paying. They were also informed that utility arrears totaling $22,431.17, accumulated over the past 6 years, had been absorbed by the new owner and were now due within 30 days unless a repayment plan was initiated. It wasn't a bluff. I had the records. I had copies of the bills, the automated payments, the breakdowns by service. Water, electricity, gas, internet. All of it. All paid by me. Quietly. Repeatedly. The letter stated that failure to comply with the new terms would result in formal eviction proceedings commencing on the 31st day. No exceptions. I didn't have to wait long. On day 2 Rachel called. 6 missed calls in a row. Then a text. "Are you seeing this? Call me now." I didn't respond. On day 3 my father left a voicemail. His voice was shaking, furious. He demanded to know who the hell these people are, and how they could raise the rent on a house he'd been living in for over a decade. "This is extortion," he barked. "I'll get a lawyer." He sounded more desperate than angry, but he wouldn't give that away. By day 5 my mother sent an email. Just 2 lines. "We don't know what's happening. Please call us. We're scared." I forwarded it to my attorney. On day 7 I finally responded, with another letter, this time from Green Links Property LLC's legal team, outlining the specifics of the payment options, including a single-sum settlement offer with a 15% discount if paid within 10 days. It included my signature, my legal name, my title, my position as managing member of the LLC. There was no ambiguity, no aliases, no shell names, just the truth, printed in black ink on crisp white letterhead. I don't know what they did when they saw it. I don't know how long they sat in that kitchen, the same one I grew up in, staring at a piece of paper that told them the person they had mocked, dismissed, and erased now owned the roof over their heads. What I do know is that for the first time in my life I stopped hoping they'd call to apologize. I waited 3 more days before making the final decision. I spent those days in silence, walking through my apartment like a guest in someone else's home. I didn't speak to anyone unless absolutely necessary. I showed up to meetings, answered emails, and went through the motions, but everything behind my eyes felt numb, quiet, hollow. The kind of silence you only hear after something has fully collapsed. On the morning of the 8th day I made a list. I wrote it in longhand on a legal pad, carefully, one line at a time. It began with all the services I had covered for them over the years. The family's shared Verizon phone plan, 3 lines in total, all paid through my corporate account under a billing alias. Then came the insurance, auto, health, homeowners, all quietly merged into an umbrella policy I had expanded as my company grew. Next were the streaming services: Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, Amazon Prime. Their logins all traced back to email addresses I had created for them and managed for over 6 years. After that came the monthly grocery gift cards, the quarterly pest control visits I had arranged through a local provider, the cloud storage subscription my mother used to keep her photos safe but never knew how to access without me. One by one I called or logged in and canceled them all. The cell phones would stop working on the 1st of the next month. Insurance policies would lapse at the end of the billing cycle. Streaming services were cut off immediately. I didn't write any explanations in the cancellation forms. I didn't warn them. I wanted it to be quiet. Then I sat down and wrote the last letter I would ever send them. I typed it on plain white paper, no letterhead, no signatures, no decoration. Just words. Simple. Final. I wrote, "I loved you. Despite everything, I loved you. For years I carried you through sickness, through storms, through celebrations that I wasn't even invited to. I paid your bills. I covered your debts. I held this family together while you pretended I didn't exist. You dismissed my work, insulted my choices, erased my contributions. You laughed at me. You humiliated me in front of strangers. You tore up proof of my loyalty. And still I gave. Still I stayed." Then I pressed enter and kept going. But what happened at that dinner was the last thread snapping. The last lie told. The last silence endured. I do not owe you a life of invisible servitude. I will not bankroll my own erasure. You chose to cut me out long ago. You just didn't expect me to take you seriously. I ended the letter with this. There will be no more money. No more services. No more safety nets. No more second chances. I'm no longer your daughter. This is the last time you will hear from me. Goodbye. I printed the letter, folded it in thirds, and sealed it in a plain envelope. No return address. No name on the outside. I mailed it from a post office in another part of the city, hand-dropped into the slot so it couldn't be traced back to any corporate account or assistant. Then I turned off my phone. I left it off for 2 days. When I turned it back on again, there were no missed calls. No texts. Just the quiet I had earned. It has stayed quiet ever since. I moved to Miami Beach in the spring, just before the rains started. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. I'd been looking at listings for months, obsessively scrolling through photos of homes with pale stucco walls, curved balconies, and tall glass windows that pulled in the ocean like a living painting. I found the one I wanted during a layover in Atlanta, of all places. I was sitting in a lounge between flights, flipping through listings, and there it was. A modern 2-story house on North Bay Road, all clean lines and soft white stone, with a glass-walled office on the 2nd floor that overlooked the water. It was listed at $1.4 million. I wired the full amount the following week. The first night in the new house I didn't unpack anything. I took off my shoes, lay down on the cool terrazzo floor in the living room, and listened to the sound of the waves pushing against the sea wall just beyond the backyard. There were no voices echoing in the hallway, no tension in the walls, no ghosts of slammed doors or silences stretched too tight. Just the sound of the tide and the whisper of the wind moving through the palms outside the glass doors. For the first time in my adult life I felt still. I spent the next few weeks setting up the office exactly how I wanted. A wide, minimalist desk in natural oak. A single monitor mounted on an arm, nothing cluttered. The chair was ergonomic, ugly, and cost more than my first car. To the left, a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf with the titles that had shaped me, design manuals, development theory, a few battered paperbacks I'd carried from apartment to apartment. Behind me, a wall of glass that opened out to a terrace with a view of Biscayne Bay. When I left the doors open, I could smell the salt and hear the gulls. It was quiet but alive. That room became the heart of Greenlinks Pro. After the fallout with my family, I had closed myself off more than I realized. Greenlinks had reached maturity, but I wasn't done building. I had an idea for an enterprise suite. Something tailored for institutional use with deeper datasets, ESG tracking, and audit tools for sustainability compliance. Greenlinks Pro was designed to be used by universities, city governments, and corporations too slow to understand what climate impact actually meant in practice. It was precise, scalable, ruthlessly clean in its architecture. And it was mine again from the ground up. I coded late into the night, sitting with my feet up on the desk, sipping tea as the waves shifted shades in the moonlight. I'd wake up early, walk the beach, and return covered in salt and sand, feeling strangely human again. Sometimes I spoke to no one for days. But I didn't feel lonely. About a month after settling in, I adopted a cat. A quiet, gray tabby with one torn ear and a habit of curling up beside my keyboard while I worked. I named her Mina. She had the kind of expression that said she'd been through something, but had made peace with it. I liked that about her. I also started going to therapy. Not the rushed online sessions I used to squeeze in between meetings, but real in-person appointments with a woman named Dr. Landon, who practiced out of a calm office in Coral Gables with muted furniture and long pauses between questions. She didn't ask about my business. She asked about my family. About Rachel. About the letter. About the moment my father tore up my truth and threw it away. I hated those sessions at first. I left with my chest tight and my teeth sore from clenching. But I kept going. Dr. Landon didn't tell me to forgive anyone. She didn't push closure like a product to be achieved. She helped me name the things I had buried: grief, betrayal, abandonment. She didn't try to fix it. He just let it breathe. That, more than anything, helped. One morning after therapy, I stopped by a cafe on Collins Avenue. It was small, tucked between a surf shop and a yoga studio, with soft jazz playing and a rotating menu of handwritten specials. The woman behind the counter was warm, with short curly hair pulled into a loose bun and a tattoo of a fig branch on her forearm. She handed me my espresso and said, "You look like someone who builds things." I laughed, caught off guard, and told her I did. Her name was Brianna. She owned the place. I went back the next day, and the day after. She told me about her failed startup, about how she lost her co-founder in a funding dispute and decided to build something quieter, more human. I told her about Greenlinks, about the storm of my past without giving away the whole flood. She never asked for the details, just nodded like she knew what it felt like to rebuild from the wreckage. We started meeting on Sundays. First as two professionals sharing notes on scaling teams and managing burnouts. Then as two women who saw something familiar in each other's silences. She didn't try to fix me. She never offered solutions. Just company. I never explained the depth of what had happened with my family. I didn't need to. She saw it in the way I flinched when people used the word home too easily. She saw it in the way I never answered unknown calls and paused before referring to anyone as mine. And still she stayed. Life became smaller in the best way. Focused. Grounded. I kept building Greenlinks Pro, one line of code at a time. Mina would curl around my ankles as I reviewed database architecture. My office stayed clean, quiet, flooded with light. I attended local business events, joined a women's founder network, swapped ideas over wine and fresh fruit, and slowly let the world in again. The silence in my phone never ended. The number my parents once had now leads nowhere. Their names are gone from my accounts, from my emergency contacts, from my thoughts on most days. And when they do creep in, I let them pass through like shadows. No longer attached to obligation. Miami became not just an address but a boundary. A line in the sand between who I had been and who I was allowed to become, now that no one else was writing my story for me. I posted it late at night, after another long stretch of debugging a stubborn database error. My office lights were dimmed, Mina was curled up beside the monitor, and outside the glass wall the ocean was dark and calm as if holding its breath. I hadn't planned to write anything that evening. I opened LinkedIn just to skim updates from colleagues and founders I followed. But then something snapped into focus. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the clarity that only arrives when you've already lost everything you thought you needed to protect. I clicked Start a Post, and stared at the empty white box for a long time. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, unsure at first, then suddenly steady. I didn't write names. I didn't write places. I wrote truth. Clean. Undeniable. Sharp enough to cut but not to bleed. I wrote. There comes a point when you stop explaining. When you've paid the bills in silence, swallowed the insults with grace, and accepted invisibility as the cost of love. When your success is dismissed as luck, and your sacrifices are rebranded as fiction, you learn that boundaries aren't cruelty, their survival. I built a company from nothing. Funded a family that never believed in me. Gave until I bled. And when I finally asked to be seen, not praised, not pitied, just acknowledged, I was met with scorn. So I left. No names. No need. But for anyone carrying that quiet weight, you are not alone. It is not your job to earn kindness from people who refuse to see your worth. Sometimes the only closure is walking away and letting the silence do the explaining. This isn't revenge. This is release. I stared at it for a moment. Not to second guess it, but to feel the weight of letting it go. Then I clicked post and shut the laptop without waiting for a single notification. By the next morning, the post had passed 20,000 reactions. By the afternoon, it was climbing fast. Comments poured in from founders, investors, engineers, journalists, people I'd never met from all corners of the world. Some wrote about similar stories. Families who dismissed them, siblings who mocked their ambition, parents who clung to outdated narratives and refused to update the version of who they were allowed to become. Others simply wrote, "Thank you." Or, "This gave me permission." My inbox flooded with invitations to panels, podcasts, articles. People wanted to hear the story behind the story. I turned most of them down. I hadn't written it to spark anything public. I wrote it because it was time. Because truth, when spoken at the right moment, echoes louder than any applause. A few extended family members messaged me privately. Some offered soft apologies, vague attempts to reconnect. "I had no idea," they said. "I always wondered if something was off." One cousin who I barely remembered from childhood wrote, "I wish I'd said something that night." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That part of my life was already archived, boxed and shelved in a place I no longer visited. Rachel never reached out. My parents never commented. I saw that my mother had viewed the post. LinkedIn, after all, keeps receipts, but nothing came from it. That silence at last felt clean. Not empty. Just final. I didn't post follow-ups. I didn't write a thread. I let the post breathe on its own, untouched, unamplified. A single message sent into the noise and for once heard. The real victory wasn't the numbers, the attention, or the sudden wave of validation. It was quieter than that. It was waking up in my house by the ocean, feeding my cat, sipping my coffee on the terrace while the tide whispered against the shore, and knowing, without needing anyone else to say it, that I had done the right thing. Not for them. For me. The months passed quietly, like water moving over polished stones. I didn't notice the shift at first. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It came in soft moments, closing my laptop without checking my notifications, walking the length of the beach at sunrise without needing to count my steps, sitting through an entire Sunday without once wondering what they were doing or whether they were thinking of me. At some point I stopped checking their social media accounts. I didn't mute or block them. I just forgot. The urge to know, to peek into the version of life they continued without me, simply dissolved. I realized one day that I hadn't seen Rachel's face in weeks, not even through a tagged post or a second-hand photo. And I didn't feel the usual sting. There was nothing left there for me. I used to tell myself I was waiting for something. An apology, an acknowledgement, even just a crack in the wall that had been built between us. But that waiting was a kind of prison and I had held the key all along. When I stopped expecting them to change, I finally felt free. It was like exhaling after holding your breath for years without realizing it. Miami changed me in ways I didn't expect. Not just the pace, the heat, or the light, but the space. The mental stillness. People here didn't know who I used to be. They only saw the version I brought into the room. There were no old roles to perform, no family scripts to recite. I introduced myself as Alice Morgan, founder and CEO of Greenlinks, and that was enough. No one asked what my sister thought of me. No one asked why I hadn't gone to Christmas dinner. And if they did, I simply said I no longer spoke to my family and the conversation moved on. There was no weight in it anymore. Just fact. I started spending more time at sea. Not on yachts or crowded boats, but on quiet paddleboards or walking knee-deep through mangroves with a guide who taught me the names of birds I had never noticed before. I learned to appreciate silence not as absence but as presence. I began to sleep better, longer, without waking to that familiar coil of guilt in my chest. The guilt was gone. Greenlinks grew steadily and without fanfare. We expanded into the European market, then Southeast Asia. I hired a head of global partnerships who took meetings at hours I no longer wanted to be awake for. I delegated more. Trusted more. I sat in fewer rooms and watched from above as the company took the shape I had dreamed of, no longer needing me to hold every piece together. I had built something that could breathe without me. And that, too, was a kind of healing. People often say they've let go but still secretly check the rearview mirror. I don't. I don't reread the letter I sent. I don't revisit the folder I once carried like a shield, filled with documents and proof and receipts. It sits in a drawer now, untouched. A record, not a wound. Some nights I'll catch the scent of something, lemons on warm wood, a trace of perfume I once associated with my mother, and it'll bring a memory back. But I don't reach for it. I let it pass like wind across the balcony. I've learned that acceptance isn't about forgetting or pretending something didn't hurt. It's knowing it did and still choosing peace over resentment. They couldn't see me. That was never going to change. And now I understand they were never meant to. I don't need their love to feel whole. I don't need their praise to validate my work. I don't need their permission to exist on my own terms. I live in a house I chose, in a city that lets me breathe, surrounded by people who see me as I am, not as a failed version of someone I never wanted to become. And for the first time, I'm not chasing anything. I'm simply here. And that's enough. If you're reading this and you've spent years being dismissed by the people who were supposed to lift you up, if your success is constantly reduced to luck, if your sacrifices are rewritten as fiction, and your help is treated like it was never needed in the first place, set boundaries. Even if it breaks your heart. Even if it goes against everything you were taught about loyalty and family. I've learned the hard way that love without respect is not love. That giving endlessly does not guarantee appreciation. That some people are more comfortable clinging to the version of you that makes them feel superior than confronting the truth of who you've become. You owe it to yourself to stop shrinking just to fit into their expectations. It might mean walking away. It might mean starting over. It might mean sitting alone in a quiet apartment with nothing but your work, your ideas, and your belief in something better. Do it anyway. I built my life from the ground up. Every dollar, every line of code, every sleepless night. No one handed it to me. No one paved the road. And for years the people closest to me refused to see it. But I kept going. Not for revenge. Not for validation. For freedom. For peace. Whatever you're building, whether it's a business, a new home, a new self, let it be yours. Let it be honest. And don't wait for anyone to tell you it matters. You already know it does. Your work is real. Your effort is real. And only you know what it costs to get here. So protect it. Protect yourself. And don't let anyone make you feel small for surviving in ways they'll never understand.